Look at this picture of a 1950s living room. The relaxed posture, the matching outfits, the wholesome smiles permanently glued to their faces. We look back at this era of early television and see a quaint, campy slice of American nostalgia. But those living rooms were closed environments. Before the skip button or 100 other channels to click through, early television viewers were a totally captive audience. They were, in effect, a massive, unregulated test group. Early experiments tested how visual patterns and pacing could bypass conscious refusal, turning the television screen into a direct bridge to the viewer's subconscious. They bypassed selling soap and cereal entirely. Instead, they mapped out exactly where the mind was most vulnerable to pressure, finding the precise emotional triggers that resulted in compliance. If you strip away the fuzzy, black and white aesthetic of these vintage broadcasts, you find the exact psychological blueprints that algorithms use to direct our choices today. One of their first strategies was visceral disruption. To bypass a person's logic, advertisers needed a way to trigger a sudden, deeply uncomfortable physical reaction. They targeted the inherent vulnerabilities of children with toys that crossed the line into the uncanny. A doll designed to whisper secrets in the dark doesn't comfort a child, it exploits their natural fear of the unknown. These towering figures stood motionless at drive-thrus, their frozen expressions and oversized eyes mimicking the biological signals of a threat lurking in the periphery. They turned the act of buying food into a moment of hypervigilance. This animated diagram maps out why that works. A sudden fear stimulus entirely bypasses the brain's logic and reasoning barrier. It connects directly to the memory core, forcing the viewer to hyper-focus on the imagery. The bizarre, dead-eyed figures pushing sugary cereal were intentional apex predators of the television ecosystem, built specifically to haunt your subconscious so you'd never forget the brand. Once advertisers mastered primal fear, they moved on to fabricating social anxiety, a tactic we can call domestic dread. Take a look at these three housewives. Underneath the manic, repetitive smiles in 1950s cleaning commercials was a relentless threat. They established a totally impossible standard of domestic perfection, heavily implying that a single scuff mark on the floor meant total social failure. This vintage advertisement demonstrates the escalation into existential dread. By placing the text, "More doctors smoke Camels," front and center, the tobacco industry weaponized the calming, trusted authority of medical professionals to sell a highly lethal product. They paired that stolen medical authority with an aura of fatalistic glamour. Notice how the luxurious silk and roses perfectly framed the burning ash. Marketers convinced consumers to embrace their slow poisoning as a high society lifestyle choice. Hour after hour, the television broadcast a continuous loop of these phantom threats: dirt, disease, and social rejection. The goal was to completely exhaust the viewer's mental defenses. Each purchase offered a temporary, commodified escape from the specific panic the commercials themselves had worked to instill in the viewer's mind. When persuasion wasn't fast enough, the industry abandoned it entirely. They moved to the final tier of vintage manipulation: brute force psychological hacking that required absolutely zero conscious consent. By saturating the screen with the jagged reality of twisted metal and graphic warnings, these broadcasts forced the viewer into a state of acute alarm. This sensory assault was designed to forge a permanent, fearful association with the behavior they wanted to stop. This archival photo of film storage represents the staggering volume of physical media broadcast, giving rise to subliminal flashing, hiding commands between frames. By physically splicing a single-frame command, like "buy," into thousands of feet of film, marketers attempted to silently hijack a viewer's intent. The Federal Trade Commission eventually stepped in, forcing these overt, brute force neurological hacks off the airwaves and out of the television ecosystem entirely. The literal flashing frames were outlawed, but the underlying ambition to silently pull the levers of the human brain without asking permission remained perfectly intact. It just needed a more sophisticated delivery system. The 1950s television set was a large, static box confined to the living room. Today, the screen is intimate, highly personal, and resting right in your pocket. This animation illustrates that transition. Modern algorithms are the direct, highly evolved descendants of those vintage psychological blueprints. They map your specific fears and inadequacies with a precision those early ad executives could only dream of. We now facilitate this cycle by constantly interacting with the very tools designed to monitor us, transforming the one-way broadcast of the past into a continuous, self-feeding loop of consumption. The next time a targeted ad feels eerily specific or leaves you feeling just slightly unsettled, recognize what is happening. The machine is pinging your psychology to see if you're vulnerable.